I'm Karen Farnsworth of Wildflower Quilting, and this video is about how to line up crosshatching when you're stitching an area that is large enough you're going to have to roll the quilt. This video is about how to line up those crosshatch designs. It can be tricky. I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm going to demonstrate today using a pattern called Pat's Grid. This is a design that comes with your Statler. Imagine that my project today is to stitch crosshatch on a panel in the center of a quilt. This panel is 30 inches by 40 inches, so it's a large area, and I'm going to have to roll my quilt in order to stitch the whole thing. I'm putting a crosshatch design in this panel, so the first thing that I do is draw a boundary. Now I have drawn a boundary on the screen that is 30 by 40 inches, the size of my panel. But when I am working on my actual quilt, I will draw a boundary that shows the actual stitching area that I'm working in. Now I like to do everything visually, so I am just going to take my design and let's see, first I might go into properties and change the size of this design because 119 inches is way too wide. I know that my panel is about 30 inches, so I'm going to change my pattern size to 30 inches wide, save and close, and then drag it over onto the screen, and it's just about the right size. Once the first pattern is in place, I'm going to rubber stamp it. And then I'm going to place that second copy on top of my first. I'm going to overlap my two patterns and scroll way in if I need to so that I can line them up perfectly. So there I am lined up, but you can see that I'm overlapping at least one diamond on this Pat's Grid design. Place it right there. And one of my favorite things about Creative Studio 7 is that the rubber stamp stays active until you've placed as many patterns as you need to. So hooray, I'm ready to place my next design, and again I'm going to overlap at least one diamond, make sure it's right in the exact spot I want it, and place that third design. Alright, we're going to stop right there for now. I have 1, 2, 3 patterns, but they're overlapping. Now the second design that I placed, I am going to delete because this was just a placement design. It was just showing me how much space I needed to leave in between my two rows. Now, if you're a numbers person, you can set these crosshatch designs up using repeat patterns and then just figure out the distance between the top and the bottom of one of these diamond points and then put that in as a vertical spacing. I'm not a numbers person, I'm a visual person, so I really like just rubber stamping and placing these patterns like I did. Now I would stitch these designs, and my quilt will look something like this, with this gap between the two patterns. Once I've stitched these two patterns, I'm going to come back in and fill in this space using Draw Line. I'm going to demonstrate on the screen, but it's very important that you actually choose these points on your quilt with your machine head. Draw a line starting at the edge, and I choose these points. And jump back and forth in between all the way over to the other side of my quilt. Now I'm not going to go all the way there, but I would go all the way to the other side of my quilt and then come back choosing the opposite points. Because the two main crosshatch patterns have already been stitched, most of the shrinkage has been dealt with. So I can mark these points all the way across the quilt and back. And then I would stitch those designs. Now remember, you won't be making these point-to-point lines on your screen like I did. you will be making these point-to-point lines on your actual quilt with your machine head. The reason I really love this method is because when you try to line up cross-hatching designs, it's a lot of trouble, right? Because of the shrinkage in a quilt. And when you roll the quilt, things just move. And so you might end up with something that looks like this, or maybe even with bigger gaps than that. And your eye is really attracted to those big gaps and those open spaces. But even if your pattern has shifted, so let me just create a shifted pattern, or they're not lined up or straight or perfectly square anymore, when you use this method, as long as you stitch up to the points of the previously stitched patterns, your eye is not going to notice the small discrepancies or the irregular shape of these squares. Because your eye can't see a gap, it's going to look like a smooth, continuous crosshatch design. Let me just get across this quilt so that I can show you what I mean. See, there's more than 1/4 of an inch difference here between the width of these two designs. That's just showing what can happen with shrinkage. But using this method, as I build this design, you don't notice so much of an issue here as long as I catch the tips of each one of these diamonds. And when I'm finished going all the way across this quilt, you'll be able to see that my eye doesn't see a difference, especially once this is stitched, so it's the same color. Your eye doesn't notice that trouble or the wonkiness. Your eye does notice these points over here. One thing that can help is turning on stitch in points when you're stitching a crosshatch. You can see how the tip of my square is not really a point because I did not have stitch in points on. If I had, it would come to a nice crisp point, and it would have been much easier for me to select that point when I came back through using draw line.
Continue using this method all the way down the quilt. Leave gaps between quilted areas and then fill them in with point-to-point line. If you liked this video and you found it useful, you might want to check out Karen and Georgia's Academy. It's a Facebook group where Georgia Stoll and I post weekly videos on various quilting topics. You can find more information on my website, wildflowerquilting.com. Thanks for watching and enjoy!